Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook live video feed, the link to which I will now put in the chat room. For better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn your microphone on to say hi, and I will be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guests are Davide Massa, a researcher in urban and transport studies at WSP Global Incorporated, an engineering services company, and Juan Munoz, an architect and video producer. Welcome, Davide.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect.
Davide, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so nice to meet you all. I was born and raised in Milan, where I studied architecture and focusing especially on the urban perspective, so the highest scale, how we like to define it, of architecture. Then after graduating, I moved to the Netherlands to go on studying another very interesting topic for me, which is transport and whatever is related to transport, which is not as far as many people think from architecture, because the two things really need to get along, to cooperate. And so that's what I'm eventually trying to do now. I moved again about a month ago to Stockholm, Sweden, where I'm performing some research, specifically in the field of rail transport, but still trying to have a broader perspective as well on cities and on exactly what I was saying, so on the interaction between urban and transport phenomena and developments possibilities.
Okay, welcome, Juan.
Hi. For invitation again, and I hope the sound is okay.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, great.
Juan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm from Colombia. I live in Vienna already 24 years. I am architect from a university in Colombia, and I came to Vienna to make a postgraduate. I work not only in architecture, I worked 20 years, almost 20 years in architecture, and now I work in many other things, video and some other communication projects.
Okay. So welcome to both of you. Let's take a look at our first video.
New York civilized world, city of iron, stone, concrete. City of ideas. City of people, over 8 million of them. In the early morning hours, the city moves slowly, like some slumbering giant about to awake. Just north of the heart of the city lie the great train depots housing the vehicles of transport that serve the metropolis. Silently, they wait for the new day. Then, as dawn becomes morning, they begin a slow, steady movement that increases in tempo as trains and buses move to meet the needs of the people. An endless flow of machines to serve New York. The outward movement begins in all parts of this great urban center.
Okay, so this brings us to our first roundtable. What is the definition of a city? Can we start with you, Davide? And you need to unmute yourself first.
Well, it's like cities are like so important in the history of humanity that it's nearly impossible to give a definition of what a city is, because of course we can stick to more, let's say, technical definition and even with some numbers. So and that really varies between countries. We could say, oh, a city is when more than 1,000 people live together, or more than 10,000, or maybe even more than 1 million. Really, it's really context based. I think if we just put ourselves in China, what a city can be in many countries in the world would only be a small village. So that's really, as I said, context based. But what I would really like to what I really think about when I think about cities is interactions between humans, and the scope of whoever is in charge of building a city, of maintaining a city, developing a city, is to actually make, well, first of all, to make these interactions possible, but also to make them better, because we know that they have been possible already for many years, but we also know that there are many issues within our cities. And so we're going to talk about later about how we could try to improve these issues to make these interactions better.
Okay, Juan Munoz. So we talk often about Paris and the provinces, or London and the provinces. What is your definition of a city?
Thank you, David. Also, because I really understand what Davide says, the city is a new thing, is a interaction place where the people meet. But maybe something is, for me, the city is a really new object on the earth. And this is no more than 10,000 years is something that the people come together in a place when the agriculture start also the first conception of together live and meet more together and build a new space. That new space is in comparison with the whole evolution from the earth, from the objects, from the biological materials, is a really new thing. It's a thing that one species, the human species, built for himself, and is for me is like one thing that the start or from the beginning is a part of the earth, but slowly is a really different, is really artificial object. And in that way, maybe is not only where the people meet, is only a new object for the earth, the artificial is. Maybe on that poles we can move maybe together today.
So Juan, to go a little bit more into what you're saying. So very often, like I was mentioning, you'd have a capital, London or Paris, versus the provinces, that was a place where they had, for instance, the chief religious authority, the cathedral, or where then the bishop, would proclaim law or make statements or whatever. So tell us, is that what you mean to say also artificial, artificial in the way that man builds together this kind of artificial social structure?
Yeah, it's like you said, the main cities like London or Paris, or now Dubai, for example, or really big cities like Bogota or Buenos Aires, are really examples. The opposite are like small places in the province. And that make the big difference between live together and live in a metropole, because metropole is that city that is really other thing, is artificial. Why? For me, the point is the difference between the connection between the place where the people live with the nature. In the province, on the landscape, where the landscapes is still the nature, we can live with the nature. But in the cities, the nature is like one of 1,000 things that is only one point. And that is, for me, maybe the big difference between the province and the big central things where the church, where the big institutions are, where the state are, where the governments are. And that institutions build that new object. And province is more like the old kind to live, the old way to live, that it's more near from the, that contact with the nature is there. You can see it, you can feel it, you can still have it.
David, Davide, unless you'd like to respond, we can move on to our second roundtable.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that very quick, but also very interesting fact that like all the people who are attending this meeting, we all happen to live, to be alive in the time when the urban population has become the majority in the world. And that happened a few years ago, that, as I said, more than 50% of the global population has been living in cities in the last years. And that seems to be like an unstoppable process which keeps growing. So it's really important that we really put a lot of attention on how we should drive this process in a good way.
Well, lucky for us, we have you two with us here today. So let's go on to our second roundtable. How did Western cities, European and the Americas, being the Western, evolve? And what are the key differences between them? So Davide, for instance, many of us, when we think about a city in the Americas, all the streets are pretty much at cross sections, they're all on a grid. And we talk about a downtown, as opposed to a European city. Mainly, I think the streets could be considered more circular, and they go around the center.
Yeah, well, of course, there are many factors, and I would like to mention for sure the timing of evolution of cities. So all major cities, but also smaller ones in the so-called old world, so I would say mostly in Europe for our perspective, have had a much longer history, and at the same time a much slower pace of development, or at least quite irregular, while cities in the new world, so I would say all the Americas, although with quite some remarkable differences as well, have had a much quicker process of actual city building and growing. And well, we could talk about many factors influencing this, but maybe it's not the best time now, because that would require an extra hour just for that. But I would just like to mention, yeah, the timing. Of course, there are geographical factors too. If we think about cities developed in the mountains in Europe, and how they really try to follow the orography of that specific territory, while in the New World it was just much easier to choose flat lands and to just build in a systematic way, at the same time getting inspired by what some ancient civilizations did, for example, the Romans and the Roman grid. And I would say probably 99%, if not 100%, of cities in America are built with a core of a Roman grid, because that was much easier to organize and also in a fast way. So I just like to mention these two considerations out of the many possible out there.
And Davide, can you explain to us a little bit more this Roman grid you're talking about?
Yeah, so the idea of having perpendicular streets and blocks of similar dimensions would just repeat, and just drive the evolution of a city in the two axes. They're like parallel to usually to two main axes, but just we can really see that. Maybe I will just show it later when we zoom in. But yeah, let's just focus on this grid to start with.
Fantastic. Juan?
Yeah, I mean, Davide, it's all right. The difference between the cities, the actually cities in the West world, is the history. In Europe, there is some 3,000. So Vienna, for example, bit more than 2,000 years old. And the cities in whole America, not only North America, is the whole continent was created actually for Europeans. The new cities, it was some population before. They live in another ways. But for example, Tenochtitlan, the main city in Mexico, was also with the grid, because it's really rational. It's a rational way to think, but it's like a exception. And that exception was built because that was already so for 800 years, more than 1 million people city. It was really big, was almost bigger in that time than London or Paris. And with that scale, you have to rationalize it. And that's why start to a way to thinking in repetition. But the other communities, the small communities, are growing in more organic ways. And that was the big difference. Like also Davide says, the evolution from the city in Europe were slow. And in one point, when the big imperials from Rome start to grow really, really quick, it was a military imperium. It was really important for them, really rational think. And they built the cities with a orthogonal, or in a grid, because it's the easy way to build unless, so less end. And they take that ideas where they was already in the evolution in the city when they are in the new continent. And to make some cities, they start to the easy way to do some colonial places.
Yeah, and let me just add something I actually forgot to mention, but it's relevant as well. And that's the level of governance in the development of cities, because it's pretty clear that to have the grid that we were talking about, you need some governance to have that. While if you just leave it up to the inhabitants, the city will just grow in a more irregular way, expanding more like in circles, for example, because then it's up to the single dweller to select an ideal location according to his needs, and without following a specific planning from above.
Fantastic. So at this time, I would like to ask Davide to tell us about the cities he's going to present. I believe we have a presentation about the modern cities that have particular characteristics. Take it away, David.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'd like to take you all to a very quick tour of the world by talking about 5 cities that I think are able to provide us with some good or at least interesting advice for to actually implement also in other cities. And and I would like to also to talk about, well, I said 5 cities and also 5 Ds, which happen to be some good references in this process. So let me just start and let me just share my screen so I can just drive you all. Can you all see the 5 Ds?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, fantastic. Then let's start with density. And to talk about density, well, first of all, it's quite a random fact that all these 5 properties of cities start with a D, but still I think it's functional to describe what I want to actually talk about. So we will start quickly with density. And to do so, I want to take you all to Vancouver in Canada. So let's jump in and let's look at how density develops in a North American city, which is a bit of an exception for North American standard. There are some European elements as well, but let's just focus on some, for example, subway stops, which I want to show. Why don't they pop up? Oh, I should put public transport probably. Yes. And let's see how, for example, the presence of a public transport stop influence the density of a city. So let's just go there like tourists. And let's see all these high-rise buildings just popping up just all around you. We can see the station here, somewhere elevated. But why this? It's not like just casual, of course. And the idea behind that, it's convenient to develop dense places because, and especially around the public transport facility, because all the activities that need to be performed in a city will be much more easily accessible. And so there's, behind the concept of density, there's of course an idea of optimization of the available space. And also because I'm, as you might understand, I'm a big fan of public transport. There's also an idea of creating a virtuous circle, which in the sense that density allows public transport to be more sustainable because more people are going to use it. And at the same time, public transport will be able to serve this denser area in a better way. I'm now going to move to the second D, which is diversity. And then I'm going to leave the city of Vancouver and jump into another very interesting city, which is Hong Kong, which I take as an example, but as long as diversity is considered, I could also focus on other Asian cities as well. So the idea of diversity is that, let's move to the satellite view. The presence of a diversity of functions allows an area to be more self-sufficient. So when we have residential zones and commercial zones and transport hubs and all the types of facilities that a city might require, the people who actually live there or work there need to commute shorter distances and have access to what they need in a more comfortable way. Also, the idea of diversity, which, well, it's maybe not so well. I mean, you can still see, of course, some housing functions and some shopping functions and commercial functions at very close distance to from each other, and also recreational areas. Don't want to forget them. For example, parks or sport facilities. So what am I really interested when I talk about diversity is also the possibility of seeing a city as a collection of entities which can theoretically and also practically be self-sufficient. So when an area is diversified, people won't need to travel long distances to do or to find whatever they need to do or to find, and that makes their life also easier in that sense.
Davide, if I could ask you, how do you create diversity? Is that something that happens naturally, or is it a geographic location? So you're next to a beach and also a mountain, or how do you create that?
Well, I would say both of them. Of course, there's if it's just left to the people who are there, they will also need to provide different things and services like food, housing, but also because cities are very complex environments, there needs to be also some careful coordination of all these necessities, because there are many actors involved. They have often different interests, and so there needs to be some coordination in this. And let me now move to the third D, which is design. And to do so, I want to move back to Europe, and specifically to Utrecht. Oh, let's go back to this view. Yes. So design, oh no, maybe this is better, yeah. And let's focus on the central station of Utrecht, which is actually the busiest railway station in the Netherlands, because it's really in the center of the country, and all the lines, basically almost all lines, converge and pass through this station. Design is really who we want to put our attention on. So do we want to have a car-friendly design which produce usually not very interesting cities and not very friendly places? Or do we want to put our attention on more sustainable modes, like, for example, pedestrian facilities and bike facilities? Let's just try to zoom in somewhere and to dive into. And it's really about, well, when we talk about city design, it's really about how we decide to distribute the space, because space is always limited, also in big countries, which is not the case of the Netherlands, but I think the Netherlands is actually a very good example of this, because look at how much space is devoted to sustainable modes. So like we have many meters for pedestrians, and then we have 2 bike lanes and just 1 lane for cars, and then lanes reserved for public transport. While if we move to other, well, I would define worse example, the proportions will be very, very different, with much more space devoted to less sustainable modes, like cars specifically. But let's also take a look still in Utrecht at the, I just want to show you just any random photo I can find on Google. So design is also thinking about the user. So when we, for example, decide to go around, to get around by bike, then we need a place which is carefully planned to store it when we need to maybe take a train or go somewhere else. And in this sense, the Netherlands is again a very good example. With this, specifically the Utrecht one is the biggest bike parking in the world, with about 20,000 stalls for bikes. And I was really fascinated to visit it. When you really see ramps and different levels, it's really like exactly like you would think of a car parking, but for bikes. And well, so especially if you like public transport and mobility, I really advise everybody to stop at Utrecht Central and to just take a short tour into the bike parking, because it's really amazing. Let's move then to the fourth D, which is distance. And to do so, I'll go home to Milan. Oh, let's see. Oh, yes. Can I go back to? Oh. And I'm again focusing on public transport, and let's look at this area just outside the city of Milan, where there's a public transport line, a subway line, which is green. So you might not see it very well because it's, well, now it's a bit thicker, but you see how the development of this line sees a number of stations with the red M, and serving a number of villages just outside Milan. But so why am I saying this? Because the careful planning of the right distance allowed people living around these stations to actually be able to use these public transport lines and stops, and just make the car a bit less necessary. And there are some thresholds which are usually between 600 and 800 meters. So to consider like a public transport stop or line in general easily accessible by sustainable modes, that can be a bit wider if we also include bikes. But if we just start with the walking distances, those are the numbers. And yeah, we can really see how well the distance between two stations is on average about 1 kilometer. So we can just imagine some radii centered into all the stations, and making it possible to walk to the closest station within these thresholds of 600 to 800 meters, which mean 5 to 10 minutes walking. And finally, last D, demand. And demand is a result of a careful balance and planning of the 4 previous D. And to talk about demand, I'm gonna finally move to where I'm currently located, so Stockholm, Sweden. And let's zoom a bit more out now to see how the demand has been again addressed with public transport, and is in I would even say some symbiotic relationship with public transport. So if we look at these green lines, they're all branches of a subway or of a metro network. And well, we really see how the demand has really followed or gone together with these lines, because it means having accessibility to the rest of the city, but also keeping in mind what I said earlier, so also to try to have every stop, hub area, and every sort of village around it as more self-sufficient as possible. And then I would like to conclude with the idea of the polycentric city. So, and what I already mentioned with Vancouver. So if we think of a city as a collection of communities, and where all or most of the functions are easily accessible, we just simplify displacements, because we make many displacements unnecessary, and at the same time, we also are able to conserve a local identity, which is also something that characterizes cities. But this is, and I'm just about to conclude, that this is not at all a completely new concept, because we can go back more than 100 years and mention what one of the most famous references for urban planning is back in the early 20th century. And so we really see how more than 100 years ago, all the ideas that and all the Ds, the 5 Ds that I've talked about, were already there. So there was already acceptance and understanding of these concepts, but then there have been so many occurrences and the presence of so many stakeholders with different interests that often not been possible to actually implement them in a smoothless way. And well, I hope I've been clear enough, but I would like to also know from Juan, Simeon.
Fantastic. So Davide, could you just tell us a little bit more about this polycentric city? Is there any polycentric city in the world at this moment? And so it includes all the 5 Ds, but how can you, it seems like what you showed with Stockholm, that seemed to be somewhat polycentric, that they connected, or even Milan, by connecting those small villages, they seem to have, like you said, then accessibility. Seems like the center of the city would be less important because people would naturally move in that direction.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. And in the case of Stockholm, that has been addressed with some very interesting planning policies, especially after the 2 wars. So where all the cities have been like growing a lot in the economic boom, at least in Europe and North America. And there was exactly this set of policies trying to not just have some residential areas, which then are easily converted into just areas that get filled during nighttime, and then they just get empty during daytime, but having a mix of function, and then we mentioned diversity again, allows them to be alive throughout the day. And well, I would say this is a key element. So there needs to be some planning, some careful planning for that to happen.
Fantastic. Juan, do you have some comments?
Yeah, thank you, Davide, for your complete presentation, for that 5 points that are really interesting, how with that point you build really complex from the city. When you are architect, you have to, or urban planner, you have to have in your head all that variations, all that like a mesh pool that you have to work with them together in a place, and with the density, with the distance, with how you can develop a place for a comfort city or a comfort place to live. And that is our work, actually, and how we can work with the institutions and with the other many, really many factors that play with that physical points. For example, the institutions, like you said, the church or the governments or the social ways to live, or this diversity, not only in diversity in form of space, the cultural diversity, all that things bring a city a live place. And that 5 points is like the place where we have to work with, and the other different levels from the city, the social levels, the cultural levels, the political, the economic levels, the education levels, have to live in between that 5 points, for example. We try, like architects, or as architects, or our planners, to make this the best what we can, but in many cities, actually, we see that we cannot do the best work because the other factors like violence, for example, or poor in a social, in an economical factor is bigger a problem, and then the space will affect it with that many problems that the city have also to contain. And maybe can I don't know if it's a good idea, maybe can I play like a bad guy today and see quick pictures. Maybe can I share some quick pictures that I found in a conversation that I have with my father. He find that in internet and send me. Maybe I will bring that maybe quick. That for you is not so boring. Please tell me if you can see that well, or is too small, or is
It's a little bit small.
Maybe I share in another way. Wait, I try again. Sorry. Maybe like that. It's better, or it's the same?
Perfect.
Okay. Let's see really quick that pictures that made some guys to bring like a graffiti way to think about the city. So that is the same place. That is in a Russian city, and you see the difference between I think no more than 50 years. Or for example, that picture with a Houston, Texas cross and Siena center, like the same scale, but absolutely different way to manage that space. That is a city. That is a complete city, a small city in Alaska. But everybody who lives on that town is not actually a city, but it's a town, live there, work there, and make everything there. That is not a collage, that is a true, and is in Macau, like you can see. That is in Egypt, I think so, and not Baghdad. So all before the war, after the war, but there is a places that we call cities. And really, really many pictures that said for me or show, okay, city could be our house now, our habitat, but we can do many really funny or not so funny things there. I go a bit quicker. That is Cairo, and it's that is the normal Cairo. It's not after a war. Is like it is. So you cannot. This in the middle. Actually, it's not in the desert, but it's quite almost around. This is in China. Again, another ways to live now to manage that 5 space points that Davide called us, or social and economic factors, scale, distance, density, all that factors that are in a ways that I ask, wow, we build that place. That is in China again, and that is a Eiffel Tower in China. Again, Hong Kong Street, Hong Kong. I mean, I think really it is, we can say this is funny, but Dubai, absolutely crazy for me. So time, how we built Vienna 2,000 years to grow slowly in a central way. Dubai in 50 years is in a orthogonal grid way. So security ways, rich, poor. So you can see that in Hong Kong, but is similar in Sao Paulo, for example. That is the typical view from Los Angeles. That is Filipinas, that is in Manila. That is a big hole. It's a mine for a diamonds mine in Russia, also in Siberia. This is the typical graffiti way to present the life now, the city life now. Nápoles, so Neapel. So how many scales live together, have to. That is for me one of the craziest places. It's absolutely, you live. That is a river in India, and it's the whole contamination. That is Venezuela, but could be Brazil, could be Bogota, could be also in India. That is, for example, a really nice way, like we said, architect, how you can work with the topography, but in another way, in the economical or social way, it's absolutely crazy. That is like a collage again, and it's true. It's in a mall, and the four managed from the mall. The new internal spaces. Okay, I go faster. It's already done. Also, United Arab Emirates. And that is the way that we go now, with the scale. For me, that was my point. That many, sorry. Okay. So why I said that now, because city is a really new space that we built, but I think we have exaggerated. I don't know how you said it.
Exacerbated.
Exacerbated. Maybe is too much. And we have to rethinking many things there.
So I'd like to ask if anybody has any comments or questions. Please feel free to join in. Ask Davide or Juan your questions. They are there to hear your questions, answer your questions, hear your comments. Davide, you have any response to Juan's presentation?
Yeah, and I really enjoyed looking at all the photos and pictures from Juan, because they, I think they can really, well, first of all, each of them could really be the starting point for a future conversation that we might have, because they were really giving insights in a graphical way about what the big issues are in cities nowadays. And at the same time, what I was thinking about is that if we could also associate most of them to some of the Ds that I mentioned before, and think about how with the Ds we could actually improve that situation. That would be a very interesting exercise to do.
Okay, so this brings us to our final roundtable. What does the ideal city offer its residents? And I'd like to start with Juan, please.
One ideal city for me now, that's the question. What is the ideal city that I can?
Yes, or what would it look like to you? What does, if you would make an ideal city, what does that offer? Does it have a lot of hospitals? Does it have those bike paths like Davide said about Utrecht, or does it have a lot of architects?
Yeah, actually, maybe I bring today one idea that I have still in secret, actually, because it's a hypothesis from me. And it's a new word that I said, restriction. So restriction is a new concept that is not reconstruction, is also not destruction. Is restriction is like to have the city or the world like it is, and study, and like Davide said, there is a many, so that 5 points, for example, I take really seriously, and how we can work the density, the distance, your 5 points, and make a diagnosis with the city now. And we have to start with how is the city now, to think on the future. Like he said, it's like really nice start point to work with together. And that means restriction for me is make that diagnosis and start from that point like it is now and go through a new ideas. And my ideas are, like I said on the beginning from the conversation, maybe for me, the big break point is that we lost the connection between the humans' way to think and to make the things with the nature. We lost that point already many years ago. I think 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago. And that way to work, to be part of the nature is the way that we have to think now. So the whole wave now to think ecological, to think green, to think in a, that's the sustainability way to think with the nature is the only way to think now for me. That means when we start a plan now for a space in the city, for me, the important point is to think how is the nature now there before we come with the cement, with the asphalt, with our materials. Our materials are also from the nature. That is an older point. The whole cities, New York, Manhattan, are built with nature materials. We make some mix like plastic, but it comes also it comes not from Mars or from Jupiter. It comes from here, from the nature from here. And the first thing is from where we take the things, in which way we take the things, in which way we mix now the things, and in which way we put now in the place that we call the future city, that materials, in which mixture. And for me, the beginning is, okay, there is a river here. The river, how is the river? We have not to build again canals with concrete and say the river, you have to go here. No, maybe we have to reverse and okay, you go there because there are a natural arguments why the best way for the water is that one. And that is my way to think now. I think the ideal city for the future is to read how the things are and to make our new materials only to convey, to complain with that what it is. And only with that point, I think we have we bring a really new way to bring a city.
Okay, Davide, do you agree? If I
Yes,
understand,
like to say probably, well, easier said than done, but the ideal city is basically, in my opinion, the place where all the daily activities can be performed in the safest and easiest way. That's very much up to that. And well, I said easier said than done because then we know how many challenges lie in between this saying it and having that actually possible. But I think a key point is that whoever is in charge of ruling a city, of governing a city, really needs to take into account what the citizens' interest is in a city. So what is the best way to have them live there in a safe way, in an easy way, when they can just do what they need to do?
Mhm.
And how do you see that today, Davide? Are the politicians working well? Are they getting that done? Or
Well,
are we going in the right direction?
Yeah, there are a lot of good ideas available. And I think a key element is also to be able to understand them. Well, there's, of course, the understanding part and also the contextualization part, because we cannot just pick the good examples and replicate them around the world, because every city is unique in their own way. But if we just try to make the effort to put them into a context, then we can really understand what we can do for a city to thrive, to develop in a good way.
Okay, fantastic. So the conversation will continue. We will be speaking again. We have a series of urban development and planning shows coming up in the next month. So we will be seeing Juan and Davide again. We are very grateful for that. So let's see how in the meantime, how we can stay in touch with them. Here, Davide, he is available on LinkedIn. There it is, MSSDDMIT. There's Davide. So Davide, people can just reach out to you here if they have any questions or want to get in touch with you.
Sure.
Fantastic.
Best way.
And Juan Munoz, he's here on Facebook. There it is, Juan. People can reach out to you if they have any questions.
Yes, for sure. Always.
Wonderful. Okay, so I will put that in the chat room. There it is, Davide Massa on LinkedIn, Juan Munoz on Facebook. If you would like, they are there to stay in touch with until we see them the next time. Thank you so very much to Davide Massa. Thank you very much to Juan Munoz.
Thank you very much, Davide, and everybody.
So let's take a look at what's coming up next Wednesday. It is Sylvia Eisenberger-Kunst, the Society of Friends of the Fine Arts, Vienna. Vienna is well known for its classical music, but what about its huge contribution to the visual arts? Vienna's premier visual arts institutions, the Academy of Fine Arts, the Albertina Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, are all supported by the Society of Friends of the Fine Arts, Vienna, the mission of which is to procure new acquisitions for the collections and commission new artworks. Sylvia Eisenberger-Kunst is the Society's General Secretary, and nobody knows the visual arts of Vienna better than she does. Come welcome Sylvia to our show for an exclusive look at Vienna, city of the visual arts. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Once again, that's next Wednesday, Sylvia Eisenberger-Kunst, the Society of Friends of the Fine Arts, Vienna. Once again, thank you so very much to Davide Massa. Thank you very much to Juan Munoz. Thank you also to Agnieszka Rivole for her support of this show. And most of all, thanks to you, our participants who make it all worthwhile. From Vienna, Austria, from Stockholm, Sweden, and New London, New Hampshire, goodbye. See you next Wednesday.